Let's bring in right now Pulitzer Prize-winning associate editor of the Washington Post, Bob Woodward, and political reporter for the Washington Post, Robert Costa. They're, of course, co-authors of the book Peril. Also with us, New York Times reporter and MSNBC security analyst Michael Schmidt. He's the author of Donald Trump versus the United States.
Wow.
Let's just start. There's so much we want to talk about with Steve Bannon. We want to talk about the ongoing investigation. But you guys you were just neck deep in following Trump. You wrote books on Trump. You reported on him every day. Let's talk about, because Biden has been knocked around a lot. His numbers have gone down a lot. But let's talk about the difference between things actually getting done. We're about to get the House past the second really significant piece of legislation.
That's exactly right. I mean, Jonathan brought up the earlier passed legislation this year, the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion, significant social spending program. Biden's done it again with the infrastructure package. The question is for the Democrats, can they sell it, and can they keep Democrats like Senator Manchin along on this next component, the Build Back Better? Biden's made a decision as president to move in a more progressive direction. And he had that. January 6th was such a crossroads for his presidency, not just because of the insurrection, but because on that day it became clear that Democrats would have the Senate majority. And when he saw that as the longtime senator, as the two-term vice president, that was an opportunity to really use power to bring the Democrats together on some of the major spending. But there could be a political cost. But for now, he's moving full speed ahead.
So let's talk about January the 6th, Bob. Let's talk about the investigation, and let's focus on Steve Bannon. He's been in the news this week. We've all known. We've known Steve. I've known him for a long time, actually. And I always sort of saw him as a gadfly, somebody who'd say whatever he could say to get in the news, to get in front of cameras.
Yeah, the master of chaos.
The guy who said, I'm a Leninist. I like Lenin. I want to tear government down. Right. I'm wondering, though, now, have we moved from him being a gadfly to him being an insurrectionist to be him being guilty of sedition? Or is this just a guy who was just looking to raise hell?
Well, as it was being discussed earlier, there's reporting to be done, and it isn't reported out, I think, to our satisfaction at all. There's a lot of mystery in this, but we found in our book that Bannon is the instigator. On a week before January 6th, Bannon is in his townhouse on the phone with Trump, almost kind of directing Trump and saying, you've got to come back. You've got to get Pence off the effing ski slopes. This is a day of reckoning. And really, Trump, you know this, Trump gave up the New Year's Eve party to come back to Washington.
Trump doesn't like giving up those parties. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've been down there with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and he just loves it because he goes into the room, people stand up, they applaud, they bow, and to give up New Year's Eve, I mean, who? Wow, that's a big-time sacrifice, and the sacrifice for what? And that really needs to be filled in, and as we report, I mean, Bannon is saying we are going to literally strangle the Biden presidency in the crib. And, what's going on there? Is that just politics, or is that January 6th, a big event, a coordination involving 1,000 people? Who can ever get 3 people to do the same thing at the same time?
And then, Bob, of course, what he says on his podcast, I guess, about January 6th, that all hell's going to break loose. I don't know the exact words, but he basically said a lot of stuff's going to happen after saying they needed to strangle the Biden presidency in the crib. Then he moves forward to talking about the chaos, telling people all hell's going to break loose on January the 6th. Is that a political gadfly, somebody who's just trying to get attention?
Well, we're in a new, very serious phase about how those statements and those comments behind the scenes will be interpreted, because since this book has been published, it's become clear that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, has opened a grand jury investigation. And that grand jury led to Bannon getting this criminal indictment for defying a congressional subpoena. And Bob and I have been talking for the last few weeks about where could this grand jury be going. And no one knows grand juries more than Woodward and Bernstein following Watergate. But grand juries have subpoena power. They operate in secrecy. We don't really have a window into where this is going. And what we're really wondering is, and you look at Chief Justice William Howard Taft from almost a century ago, there is a crime in the U.S. Code about defrauding the United States. And if you defraud the United States by deceit or trickery, that's a federal crime. And the Taft ruling really established that back in the early 20th century. And what we're really wondering, is this Department of Justice going to build a criminal conspiracy case against Bannon and others for conspiring against the United States and the peaceful transfer of power?
And for the Attorney General to say, we're not just going to file a criminal information against Bannon, but set up a grand jury. And if you look at the history of grand juries, they can be very independent when the Attorney General says, okay, here are a group of citizens. And I remember back in the Nixon case, it was the grand jury that pressured the prosecutors to name Nixon as an unindicted co-conspirator. So you're relinquishing some of your power when you set up a grand jury. That in itself is a big, significant maneuver. And then you see what Garland said publicly, his statement on the Bannon indictment. He essentially said, I'm all in. We're going for this. We're going to get to the bottom of it.
So, Michael Schmidt, they talked about defrauding the government and the precedent there for a crime. You also, of course, so if you look at the statute, the federal statute for conspiracy to commit sedition, it's sort of, I mean, all four corners of Bannon's activities fit into that statute because everything he's doing is intended to stop a constitutional process or a legislative process from moving forward. That's the language. If you're trying to stop one of those processes by your actions, which is exactly what Bannon said they were doing, then you're part of a conspiracy to commit sedition.
The thing about Bannon's actions around January 6th that I think we sometimes lose sight of is that they could be tied to his, well, certainly motivationally, he was in a very different position at that point because he had been indicted in 2020 and he was looking for a pardon. And he had been out of Trump's orbit, in his orbit, out of his orbit throughout the entire presidency. And he was looking for a way to re-ingratiate himself with the president because he dearly wanted that pardon. And he rallied around the president and said and did the things that he knew the president would want him to do and became that cheerleader and that pawn on the battlefield, as you know, the Capitol basically turns into on January 6th. And he ultimately does get that pardon before Trump leaves office in the final hours of the Trump presidency. So now Bannon has a completely different series of legal problems that have arisen from this. But at the time Bannon did this, Trump was able to use his own power as president in ways that Trump certainly cannot do now. And we still see the reach and the impact of Trump's power as president in Bannon today.
So, Bob Costa, I should note that there are excerpts from your book used in the subpoena against Steve Bannon, including scenes from inside the Woodward Hotel, which became as sort of the war room for that January 6th insurrection in many ways. Take us inside there. Who else was there? Are these also people right now who could be facing themselves legal trouble like Steve Bannon?
You were there that night.
I was there January 5th, walking around the Woodward Hotel. I didn't know there was going to be an insurrection the next day, but I did believe...
That would have been a scoop.
That would have been quite a scoop. That would have been the scoop of the century. And I probably should have gotten a hotel room just so I could hang around, but I didn't really. Anyway, we'll leave that alone. But January 5th, I just knew, based on our reporting, we were just starting to kind of get into this transition in the book project. This was a gathering place. It was a gathering place for the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys outside. And inside, you had Giuliani, John Eastman, Steve Bannon. And what we didn't know for months is that Trump's calling in. Trump's calling into the war room. And that's the scene that's cited in the subpoena, because it's clear the January 6th committee in the House picks up on that. Because if they're trying to paint a picture of coordination or even possible conspiracy, there have to be exchanges. And there's clearly exchanges between Trump and Giuliani. Trump and Bannon. And this goes late into the night. And to talk about the use of power, the possible abuse of power, it's striking that this Willard War Room is the group of people with Eastman, with Bannon, saying to Trump late at night, along with Jason Miller, another Trump advisor, we're now going to speak for Pence. We're going to issue a statement saying Pence is fully in lockstep with us to not certify the election. And this is stunning to the Pence people near midnight on January 5th. The president is turning publicly against his own vice president and starting to mouth words for the vice president, even though Pence doesn't believe what Trump is saying.
And the important element here is the language is we want to block Biden. We want to stop Biden. And that is reflected in the subpoena itself, that language of block.
And
the question is also, is it illegal to try to block the certification of the person who's the president?
Also with false information. Think about the Eastman memo saying that night there are alternate electors out in the states.
And they don't exist.
They don't exist.
But it is illegal to block an official government action in that way, isn't it?
That is,
it is. That's in the statute.
That's in the statute. That is, if you're working with other people to do that, to stop official government action, that is the definition of a conspiracy to commit sedition. Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.